It was the budget before the ballot, the 10th and final budget of the Modi Sarkar 2.0 before, of course, general elections this summer. One thing must be credited to the finance minister. She could have gone the populist, welfarist way, given that there are elections to be won. But she stuck to fiscal prudence. It's 5.8% for this fiscal and the fiscal glide path to 4.5% by 25-26. That'll be followed. But at the same time, the criticism, particularly from the opposition, is that there was no big-ticket announcement in this budget, no major changes to tax slabs or rates, and that is something that the middle class always hopes for. One big takeaway has been on capital expenditure, which will continue to increase in the rate of knots. But the bigger question is this: how will Budget 2024 be rated? How will the economic report card of Modi Sarkar for the last 10 years, how will that look like? We have a full panel of experts from the fields of politics to business to economy. But first, the story of Nirmala Sitharaman's 6th budget, the 10th of the Modi government. This is Budget 2024.
ये बजट इंक्लूसिव और इनोवेटिव बजट है। इस बजट में कंटिन्यूटी का कॉन्फिडेंस है। ये बजट विकसित भारत के 4 स्तंभ युवा, गरीब, महिला और किसान सभी को एम्पावर करेगा।
Building on the massive tripling of the capital expenditure outlay in the past 4 years, resulting in huge multiplier impact on economic growth and employment creation, the outlay for the next year is being increased by 11.1%. Our government is working with an approach to development that is all round, all pervasive, and all inclusive. It covers all castes and people at all levels. We are working to make India a Vikasit Bharat by 2047.
All right, so depending on which side of the aisle you're sitting on, this budget can be characterized either as lackluster or visionary. Let's get both sides of the aisle on this debate. In our first big face-off tonight on a special edition of Brass Tacks, Baijan Jay Panda is National Vice President of the BJP and Shashi Tharoor is Congress Member of Parliament from Thiruvananthapuram. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for speaking with us. So let me start with you, Jay Panda. The accusation from the opposition is that this was the last budget of Modi Sarkar 2.0. It's lackluster. It doesn't have any big-ticket announcements. How will you respond to that?
It takes some gall to describe this budget as lackluster because it consolidates a decade of outstanding achievements of the Modi government and lays, it is an interim budget after all, but still then there are extremely ambitious plans outlined. Of course, the main, the much bigger picture will come out in July when the full budget is rolled out. But just think about this. India continues to be the fastest growing large economy in the world. Even the projection for the coming year continues to be that. It is celebrated around the world, attracting huge amounts of foreign direct investment, which have doubled in the last decade compared to the previous decade. It's not just a question of the affluent getting better off, because average incomes have improved by 50%. You see the consumption in rural India to see how well Bharat has performed. Huge numbers of Indians have been pulled out of poverty. The 250 million number, which is documented as having come out of multimodal poverty, is hugely significant. You look at the number of Indians that have been made self-sufficient. For example, the Lakpati Didis. Now already 10 million women have become Lakpatis, and the original target, which had only recently been set for 20 million women to become Lakpatis, has now been revised to 30 million. These are all indicative, but let me tell you, the biggest good news, I think, is the double-digit commitment to capex growth. Now we've had, the capex has gone up by 3 times in the last 4 years already. And you've seen that over the last decade, the number of airports have doubled, the number of expressways, the number of facility in trains. Now, the 11.1% additional growth to capex is very important, because it takes the capex numbers up to 3.4% of GDP, as opposed to a decade earlier that having been only 2.8%. And on top of that, this has been managed with the controlling government borrowings, so that more room has been created for credit flow to the private sector and to the average Indian citizen. So I think this is extremely positive news. And as I said, the full details of the roadmap ahead will come in July.
Let me ask Mr. Shashi Tharoor then that, at least you have to concede that the government 2 months before an election could have chosen to go the populist, more welfarist route, but they've refrained from doing that. She has stuck to the fiscal glide path. It's going to be 5.8% for this year and 4.5% by 25-26. So at least, will you give credit to the government for not going populist and welfarist 2 months before an election and sticking to fiscal prudence?
I can give them credit for restraint, or I can blame them for complacency, but we're just quibbling on words. Let me respond to the specific issues Jay raised, if I may, Zaka. First of all, on the question of incomes, the sad truth, unfortunately, is that whereas under UPA 2, real agricultural and non-agricultural rural wages did grow at 8.6%, 6.9% per annum respectively, we have seen a complete decline under the NDA. First, a deceleration in their first term to 3%, and in this term, the annual growth of real rural wages has become negative. So he's talking about Bharat. The people in Bharat, I'm afraid, are having lower income in rural India than they had earlier. There's also been a Reuters survey this month, which you must have seen, which says that 85% of people have said they've seen no increase in their incomes. In fact, 44% said they're earning less than before the pre-pandemic years. And post-pandemic, the poorest 20% of households in our country have seen their income levels shrink 52%. There is no acknowledgement of this in the complacency of the government's position. And we're looking at great inequality, growing inequality that everyone is noticing, because the top 20% of our country have seen an almost 40% rise in their income growth during NDA 2, whereas the bottom 60% have seen a negative income growth, that is, they've lost money. Look at unemployment, which is a matter of grave concern for us in the opposition. It reached a 45-year high in 2017. Currently, according to the CMIE, unemployment is at 8.7%. But if you break it down further, the unemployment rate among youth aged 20 to 24 is a staggering 45.4%. What hope do these young people have of a future in our country with such high rates of unemployment becoming the new normal? Whatever few jobs have been created have been in financially precarious activities like construction work and low-end service jobs like Ghar Ki Naukri, whereas agriculture and manufacturing jobs have fallen. Educated unemployment has worsened sharply. Graduate unemployment has risen to 35.8%, double the UPA numbers. Postgraduates have gone up to 36.2%. We're looking at a very serious crisis of both unemployment and indeed of incomes. So the fact that people don't have jobs, they don't have decent incomes, and we're talking as if the government has something to celebrate. No wonder they have to give 80 crores of people free food grains, because there's so many people still who can't afford to eat properly. No wonder they don't do consumption expenditure surveys for 8 years from 2014 onwards, so that they can come up with these highly dubious and debatable assumptions behind their claims that the largest number of Indians has been freed from poverty, completely unsubstantiated by any international body. If you look at the UN numbers or the World Bank numbers, we don't see these kinds of claims. So let's be very honest and say, ask the Aam Aadmi what they're experiencing. Don't ask us to. I think you'll get a very good answer from the one you got from either the finance minister or Jay Panda.
So Jay Panda, respond to both of those specific points. One, on the issue of unemployment, and this has been a bugbear for the opposition for the last 10 years with the Modi government, that youth unemployment in particular is at record highs. And the second issue, on the issue of rural incomes and rural wages, the opposition is claiming that there is evidence to show that rural consumption, rural demand is down. You can look at fast-moving consumer good products in the rural areas. It's come down. The sale of tractors has come down. So please address both of those concerns. Unemployment, particularly among young people, and two, depressed rural wages and demand.
If all of this, what Shashi was saying and what you've just highlighted were true, it would have been a political catastrophe, which is not the case. You see the support that the Modi government and the Prime Minister personally enjoys throughout the length and breadth of the country. Shashi just made a casual brush off about the 800 million people that are benefiting from free rations. The reality is the policies of earlier decades were terrible, with huge amounts of food grains being stacked up and being lost to pilferage and to rats, whereas it is much better utilized giving them out to Indians. And since the pandemic, this has been done on a massive scale, which adds up to the many reasons why rural Indians are being pulled out of poverty. And this 250 million figure is not seriously challenged by anyone. You've talked about unemployment. The reality is unemployment figures in India for decades have been a concern. But throughout the last year, in almost every month, and most months, if you looked at the business newspapers, on many occasions, you saw that what has been a holy grail for Indian economic planners is to create 1 million jobs a month, million new jobs a month. And that happened several times last year. The most important fact is that jobs can't be created like used to be done in the Congress days by just creating government employment, which ran the economy down. Jobs can be created with investment, and jobs can be created with entrepreneurship. And that is happening in a massive measure. I talked about the Lakpati Didis. You look at Mudra loans. 43 crore Mudra loans have been given out of which 30 crores of them have been to women. And I think the number, if I don't have it wrong, is more than 22 lakh crores. So this level of entrepreneurship which is happening is what is pulling all these Indians out of poverty. Now, you can quibble about most of the numbers, but the reality is that vast numbers of Indians are better off today than at any time since independence.
Okay.
And this is why India is being celebrated, as I said, around the world. Now, I'll just want to end with one more thing. This fiscal deficit that Shashi gave a sort of a partial compliment to is actually extremely important, because Indian governments have been profligate in the past, leading to high inflation, leading to low investment. Now, the Modi government turned it around and kept the fisc well under control until the pandemic hit, and then it went up to double digits. And after that, again, it has been brought back. Today's 5.8% number is being celebrated by economic commentators across the spectrum in India and abroad. And the commitment to take it down to 5.1% and 4.5% is extremely praiseworthy, because this single number, the fisc, has the biggest impact on inflation and the biggest impact on the sovereign rating of the country itself.
Okay.
And as I said earlier, the commitment to massive double-digit investment in capex is big for an interim budget, but you'll see much bigger announcements coming in the July full budget.
So, Mr. Tharoor, can you respond to that? Because when the Modi government took office in 2014-15, the capex was a little over 3 lakh crores. Today, it's at 11 lakh crores. That's the target for the coming financial year. That's almost a more than 3 times jump in capex, and that is good investment. That is what creates jobs. That is what creates demand across your tier 2 and tier 3 cities. That's one. And two, the other big bugbear that the opposition had with the government was on inflation. Today, inflation is under 6%. That's the RBI's sort of remit, or the RBI's zone where it wants inflation to be. And this compared to when the UPA demitted office in 2014, it was at double digits. It was in excess of 10%. So again, will you give the government credit for both of these, capex spending going up 3 times and inflation within the range where the RBI wants it to be?
I'll certainly respond to those, but let me also respond on some points Jay made that require footnoting. There is no question he's very happy about the Lakpati Didis, and so would I be. But let's note that 20% of the government's own Jan Dhan accounts created by them are inoperative, and nearly half of those belong to women. So not all women are flourishing, as Jay would imply. As for the Mudra loans, 83% of Mudra loans are under 50,000 rupees, which is not going to give you long sustainable growth and great economic advancement. When it comes to fiscal deficit, yes, it is right that NDA has got to 5.8% and is predicting 5.1, which Jay didn't mention, but I'm happy to give that to him. But let me point out that between 2004 and 2014 under UPA, the fiscal deficit averaged 4.63. So we actually did better without all the hoo-ha that we're hearing at this end. Meanwhile, with the NDA budget, which Jay says is being celebrated worldwide, let me point out that when the gross debt to GDP ratio crossed the 80% mark, the IMF expressed concern publicly about the fact that we have headed in that direction. So again, not all is well on the fiscal deficit. On CapEx, I'm glad they've increased the amount. You'll notice that in my speeches on previous budgets, I have applauded that. I'm not complaining. But I'm more worried about the kinds of things I have pointed out to which there are no real answers. If Jay says that the world is so happy with all our work and our CapEx, why is foreign direct investment going down, Zaka? The RBI has estimated in the last fiscal year that foreign investment is $42 billion, which is about the same as it was in 2008, 9, 15 years ago under UPA. Foreign investment has come down as a percentage of GDP from about 3.6% of GDP under UPA to just above 1% of GDP. And in the same period, foreign direct investment to Vietnam, for example, has gone up to 4.5% of GDP. The sheer fact is foreign investors are not flocking to India as the government would like us to believe. Gross FDI into India in the first half of this financial year was just $10 billion. And the last time it was lower than that was in the first half of 2007-8 before the world financial crisis. Our share in global FDI inflows has been steadily falling.
Okay.
And in fact, all now to 2.8% of all the FDI floating in the world. The FDI inflows as a percentage of GDP is also the lowest it's been in 16 years. This is not a global vote of confidence in our economy. And I'm sorry to say the BJP should actually shed its complacency and really get together seriously on things like ease of doing business in order to attract serious FDI again.
Jay Panda, just a quick rebuttal. I have to wrap up the segment. But on the FDI part,
Yes.
how do you reconcile
very quickly,
to what
very
Mr.
quickly,
Tharoor is saying?
Zaka, listen, most commentators would not have the chutzpah to attack us on FDI. Shashi, being the kind of wordsmith that he is brazening it out. But let me point out, the reason that FDI as a percentage of GDP is declining is because the GDP is growing so rapidly, and also because domestic investment has finally picked up, and that affects the ratios. But nobody can take away from the fact that in the Modi government decade, we've got $596 billion of FDI, as compared to less than half of that in the previous decade. That takes some degree of brazenness. Now, when Shashi talks about 50,000 rupees loan being pittance, now that represents an elitism which is not true. In rural India, 50,000 rupees loan can be transformative, and it has been transformative, which is why you are seeing such large numbers of women and young men as well who are transforming their life by becoming self-sufficient. One of the other reasons that has not been mentioned is that the various programs of the Modi government, for example, the housing program has led to 30 million houses for people that couldn't have dreamed of having a house of their own earlier. And now another 20 million such houses are going to be built for the less well-off Indians. These are some of the big factors why the economy is doing so well.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for this fascinating conversation. Jay Panda and Shashi Tharoor, thank you for joining us on this special edition of Brass Tacks.